Welcome, dear friends, to the Crimson Academy's overview of The Promised Day is Come. This book, written by the beloved guardian, Shough Effendi, presents to the Baha'is of the West, and through them to the Western world, what posterity may well judge as among the most dramatic episodes in the history of the human race. The drama, spiritual in its essence, moves through the hearts and actions of the leaders and people of the Christian and Mohammedan worlds between the years 1844 and 1944. In the opening pages, the beloved guardian Shough Effendi represents the times of supreme suffering through which the world is now passing, as a tempest unprecedented in its violence, unpredictable in its course, catastrophic in its immediate effects, unimaginably glorious in its ultimate consequences. It will bring man eventually to a realization that, to quote His Holiness Baha'u'llah, the kingdom is God's, the Almighty, the All-Praised. Those who have recognized His Holiness Baha'u'llah as the mouthpiece of God see in these unprecedented sufferings of mankind a visitation from God and a cleansing process for all mankind. God has not been silent, but has spoken to His people as of old through the mouths of His holy prophets, which have been since the world began. In 100 volumes, to quote our author, the repositories of priceless precepts, mighty laws, unique principles, impassioned exhortations, and reiterated warnings, Baha'u'llah has proclaimed as no prophet before him has done the mission with which God has entrusted him. All this while he was a prisoner and an exile. For this purpose he had forsaken fame and fortune, submitted to physical torture and cruel deprivations. What was the response of the world? His followers in the Muslim world were subjected to such persecutions as the world had not till that time witnessed. Rulers and kings looked on with indifference, while the corrupt Muslim priesthood incited the populace to make away with as many as 20,000 heroic adherents who refused to give up their faith. His Holiness Baha'u'llah directed his message, as no prophet before him had done, to the rulers of the world. He did this, the beloved guardian Shough Effendi points out, because these rulers at that time of the proclamation of the Baha'i faith in 1863 wielded absolute authority. The mass of the people had not the freedom to appraise the merits of that faith and embrace its truth. Though a prisoner and exile, he sent letters to the most powerful rulers of his time: Napoleon III, Pope Pius IX, Tsar Alexander II, Queen Victoria, William I of Germany, Franz Joseph, Emperor of Austria-Hungary, Abdul Aziz, Sultan of Turkey and Caliph of Sunni Islam, and the Shah of Persia. A large part of The Promised Day is Come is taken up with a brilliant and masterly account of the character of these rulers, their deeds, and the results of their deeds, and with quotation from Baha'u'llah's letters to them. Letters which bring out clearly and insistently the truths of his revelation, stress the preciousness of the opportunities which it was in the power of these rulers and leaders to seize, and warns them in ominous tones of the grave responsibilities which the rejection of God's message would entail, and predict the dire consequences of such a rejection. In 2 letters to Napoleon III, His Holiness Baha'u'llah called upon him to recognize him as the one foretold by Christ, to desist from his ambitions for worldly conquest, and from following the dictates of his own desires. If he failed to observe these warnings, his kingdom would be thrown into confusion, and his empire pass from his hands. This prophecy was fulfilled after Napoleon's defeat at Sedan in 1870. Pope Pius IX was called upon to accept Baha'u'llah and his message as the fulfillment of Christ's prophecy that he would come again as the Spirit of truth, who was to tell the many things which those of his time could not bear, and who was to lead into all truth. He was urged to abandon his kingdom unto kings, sell his embellished ornaments, and expend them in the path of God. Soon after this letter had been revealed, the temporal power of the papacy, which had already shrunken, received its death blow through the establishment in 1870 of the Kingdom of Italy with Rome as its capital. This humiliation of the papacy, the beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi characterizes as less spectacular, yet historically more significant than that of Napoleon III. The downfall of the German Empire in 1918 had been foretold by His Holiness Baha'u'llah in his letter to William I of Germany, in which he also prophesied that the sword of retribution would again be turned upon Berlin. Both Mohammedan and Christian worlds were called to account in various letters and in passages from his other works. Here again he placed responsibility for the decline of true religion and the consequent rejection of his message upon the leaders. Leaders of religion, is his clear and universal censure, in every age have hindered their people from attaining the shores of eternal salvation, inasmuch as they held the reins of authority in their mighty grasp. In the last pages, the beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi relates the main theme of his book to the problems of our time and removes some misunderstanding which might arise from Baha'u'llah's denunciations of ecclesiastical and temporal rulers. Although His Holiness Baha'u'llah rebuked the kings of his time, he did not belittle the principle of kingship, but rather, in many passages, eulogized it as a secondary manifestation of that authority which rests primarily in God. He quotes passages from previous scriptures which enjoin obedience to those invested with authority, and himself speaks of the majesty of kingship as one of the signs of God. A just king is the shadow of God on earth. He also prophesies the appearance of a king who will embrace the Baha'i faith and protect its followers. The rebukes to the leaders of the Christian and Mohammedan faiths, the beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi explains, are not to be interpreted as an attempt to belittle either those faiths or their righteous leaders. The Baha'i faith upholds the divine origin of all the prophets of God and does not seek to degrade the rank of religious leaders whose conduct conforms to their profession. The fundamental problem of our age is that, to quote Baha'u'llah, the way of God and the religion of God have ceased to be of worth in the eyes of men. From the weakening of the pillars of true religion has come a moral downfall, signs of which meet us at every turn. To this moral downfall we must trace the spread of lawlessness, drunkenness and crime, the inordinate love of pleasure, the irresponsible attitude towards marriage, the weakening of parental control, the deterioration in the standard of literature and the press, the advocacy of theories that are the negation of purity, morality, and chastity. For the worship of the one true God, mankind has substituted among many minor idols 3 chief false gods: racialism, nationalism, and communism. But in place of these false and war-engendering doctrines will come eventually a recognition of the saving truths proclaimed by His Holiness Baha'u'llah, such as, "Bend your minds and wills to the education of the peoples of the earth, that all mankind may become the upholders of one order. Beware lest the desires of the flesh and of a corrupt inclination provoke divisions among you." Humanity is now passing through the adolescent stage in its development, a stage marked, as in the development of the individual, by tumult, impetuosity, pride, self-assurance, and contempt of discipline. From this stage, mankind will emerge into maturity, when the ideals of the Baha'i Faith will become a reality. Dear friends, in conclusion, the beloved guardian, Shoghi Effendi, traces the steps which will lead to this great consummation, steps which must of necessity be taken gradually. They will lead at first to the establishment of the lesser peace, which the nations of the earth, as yet unconscious of His Holiness Baha'u'llah's revelation, and yet unwittingly enforcing the general principles which he has enunciated, will themselves establish. This step will bring in its wake the spiritualization of the masses, consequent to the recognition of the character and the acknowledgement of the claims of the faith of His Holiness Baha'u'llah, the essential condition to that ultimate fusion of all races, creeds, classes, and nations, which must signalize the emergence of His new world order. Then will a world civilization be born, flourish, and perpetuate itself, a civilization with a fullness of life such as the world has never seen nor can as yet conceive.